Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 24 preview and of course we have the upcoming double Game Week 25 and blank Game Week 26 that we need to start preparing for. If you're enjoying the content here on this channel and you get any use out of today's video, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well, but without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, of course, given the fact that both Manchester City and Liverpool both double in Game Week 25, along with Brentford and Luton, a lot of the focus for today will be around those Man City and Liverpool assets, and rightly so. They are two of the best teams in the league with some of the best FPL assets in the league, and they both actually have very nice double game weeks. You could argue that Liverpool's is slightly better given that it's Brentford and also Luton, but I would say that the thing that I like about Manchester City is they are playing what is currently right now a relatively weak Chelsea team. They are also playing Brentford themselves, but both of the games are at home, and we know that Manchester City traditionally, along with Liverpool, are much better at home. So having two home fixtures, as well as also a home fixture in Game Week 24, it certainly makes them worth investing in. Getting 3 home games in a row isn't very common when you bring an FPL asset in, and of course, Manchester City also play in blank Game Week 26, whereas Liverpool do not. Liverpool, along with Luton, blank in 26. So it is a massive advantage for Manchester City that you can not only get the double game week from them, but you can also get them in blank Game Week 26, and therefore it feels like less of a problem that you're creating for your team. And when we move on to the Liverpool assets today, we will discuss how it does create a bit of a problem for you if you've already got players from Chelsea, Spurs, Luton, and obviously Liverpool, all 4 of those teams blank in 26. So whilst Manchester City players always carry their own problems around being rotation risk, which we'll discuss in a second, the great advantage is at least you have them in blank Game Week 26, if, of course, they are a player that plays for that Manchester City team in that match. So what we're going to discuss first is the Manchester City defenders, and then in the next section we'll discuss the attackers. And I do think the defenders are worth considering. Like I said, 3 home fixtures in a row, and whilst Manchester City, believe it or not, have only kept 1 clean sheet in the last 12 games, which isn't great, they are still one of the top 3 or 4 defences in the league this season, and their data does continue to be good. And we've seen this at points in the past. Man City sometimes start the season quite slowly, concede goals even though the data suggests they shouldn't, and then they tend to go on a run of keeping quite a few clean sheets. Ederson is always up there, or at least near to being in the conversation for the Golden Glove, and Man City will keep a lot of clean sheets this season. So it's only a matter of time, in my opinion, assuming they continue to play the way that they are, that they will start to keep more clean sheets. And of course, they are having players that are returning from injury as well. So what I've got here is all of the Manchester City defenders that you can pick, starting with Diaz and Walker at the most expensive, all the way down to Rico Lewis. I'll rattle off the only one that isn't really an option, and that is Rico Lewis. You can see that I've actually got their minutes over the last 6 game weeks. I've got their points per game this season, and I've got their non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 this season. And as you can see, based on the minutes over the last 6, when he's been fully fit, Rico Lewis has played 90, 0, 22, 0, 90, 0. So, a couple of things that I don't like there. Firstly, he hasn't started 3 of the last 6 games, which of course isn't ideal. And on top of that, in one of the games, he did come on for a cameo. With most of the other Man City defenders, not always, but most of them, you don't tend to get cameo appearances from them. But I feel like Rico Lewis is one that you could. So, Rico Lewis, you probably don't need me to tell you that, isn't really in consideration for me. All of the other ones, I think you could justifiably pick. When we are looking at who has been the most nailed over the last 6 game weeks, believe it or not, it is Nathan Ake. He's actually started 7 games in a row in the Premier League and got 90 minutes in each of those games. And I was very, very shocked by this because what we've seen in the past, and it's backed up this season, is Ake is by far and away the best sort of goal threat and attacking threat from Manchester City when we're looking at the defenders. But as I've said over the last couple of seasons, he doesn't get the minutes to go alongside it. So it is very frustrating that the most attacking of the City defenders, you can't really pick him because he doesn't play enough. But at the moment, he is playing a hell of a lot. So over the last 6, Ake has started all 6. You can see here that Gvardiol has actually played 90 minutes in 5 of them, and then 47 minutes in 1. And then Walker has started 5 of the 6. Obviously, one he was on the naughty step or being rotated, and in the other one he played 67 minutes. So over the last 6 weeks, definitely Walker, Ake, and Gvardiol have been the most nailed. Diaz has been getting some random benchings, which has been surprising because he's usually one of the more nailed City defenders. And I'm a little bit worried about Diaz, and I would just almost rule him out immediately, given that he's the most expensive along with Walker. And a lot of the time, it doesn't really have any justifiable reason other than it being tactical or performance-based that Diaz isn't getting into the starting 11. So 3 of the 6 games, again, recently, where he hasn't started. So for me, if you're going to pay that much money, you might as well get, who looks to be slightly more nailed, Kyle Walker for 5.5 million. So like I said, Walker, Ake and Gvardiol have been the most nailed over the last 6. Where this becomes difficult, though, is obviously John Stones has been going through his own injury issues, and Akanji has also been out injured as well. And I think once Akanji and Stones are back and fully fit, and I mean fit enough to start on a regular basis, you do have to question, surely Stones and Akanji are probably in the starting defence for Man City. Because the reason that Ake and Gvardiol have been so nailed is Ake is playing at left centre-back and Gvardiol is playing at left-back. I don't think, again, when Akanji is fully fit and Stones is fully fit and maybe Diaz starts to get more in favour, I just don't see a world in which Ake starts every single game, at least every single game at left centre-back. Then the issue becomes, if Ake's not starting at left centre-back, the other position he can play is left-back. So if you think Ake is more now, maybe he could start most games at left centre-back and then he could transition into that left-back role and maybe it's Gvardiol that misses out if one of the two. But I just think Akanji can play in that right centre-back role. We can see Diaz in the left centre-back role. We can also see Akanji in that left centre-back role as well. It's probably not out of the equation to see John Stones in that role, although I don't think that is what Pep will favour. But it really does come down to Akanji being back, because at points early in the season, Akanji was definitely first choice for Manchester City. And like I said, we saw Diaz in that left centre-back role, and then either Gvardiol or Ake in that left-back role. So you may think that you know more than I do, and you may well do so, but I just don't know, once they're all fit, and at the moment, all of these defenders are fit for Manchester City, how he plans on getting them all into the 11. And I would even go as far as saying, I don't know that Walker is absolutely nailed on. If he chooses to play a system where John Stones starts at right back and inverts into the midfield, we could see that. Maybe he'll still want Walker in there as well, or maybe he'll just choose to rest Walker a little bit and have Stones inverting and playing 3 centre-backs alongside that. So it could be something like a starting 11 of Stones, Akanji, Ake and Gvardiol, or Stones, Akanji, Diaz and Ake, right? We don't really know what the combination will be. And I guess that is the issue with Manchester City. Before we even look at their numbers, I don't know what that starting back 4 is going to be for Manchester City and which system Pep's going to choose to run, because recently he's not really been running with this inverted defender playing in midfield like he did with Rico Lewis and Stones, because Stones has been out. So he's been favouring this sort of Walker wide right, Gvardiol wide left as well, and it's been working quite well for them. But I think Stones being back and Akanji being back will massively impact the minutes that these defenders get. That might have been a confusing section. It's a lot of hypothesising. But I just would look at Ake and say, yes, he started 6 out of the last 6 and played 90 minutes, all of them. Gvardiol's been getting good minutes as well. But are we confident that they continue to get those minutes? I'm slightly less so. When we look at points per game, non-penalty expected goal involvement, it is Nathan Ake. The most points per game on this list, the best non-penalty expected goal involvement on this list, and that was the same last season for City as well. He is a very, very decent goal threat from corners, and he's also very good when he plays at left-back. I think he's slightly more attacking than Gvardiol, but Gvardiol's minutes are very, data is very good as well, at 0.13 non-penalty expected goal involvement. You can also see that Rico Lewis is quite high, but Walker has actually improved his data this season as well. He's got a little bit of assist threat. Not a massive amount, but he's got over 0.1 expected assists. So this now goes back to the fact again, if I was selecting 3 Man City defenders to at least consider at the moment, it is Ake, Gvardiol and Walker. But again, as per before, are Stones and Akanji going to take minutes off them? Absolutely. And will they become the better options soon? Potentially. So I actually really do want to consider Manchester City defenders, because whilst they haven't kept many clean sheets, based on the fixtures that they've got, based on the double, you would expect that those clean sheets will come soon. And I don't see many other standout defenders at the moment. And considering most of these you can get for under 5 million, or if you go for Walker, he's only 5.5, which is cheaper than Porro, Trent, same sort of price as Saliba as well. It maybe feels like it could be worth it. But the minutes are just so difficult. And the other thing with these Man City defenders is, yes, Ake's got a bit of goal threat, but in general, you're not particularly likely to get attacking returns from them. And due to the amount of goals that Man City score, due to the amount of bonus points that De Bruyne and Haaland are good for, they often don't even really keep bonus points. There aren't many occasions this season that you see the likes of Walker step away with 2 or 3 bonus points. So they do also feel quite low upside. It's frustrating because in my head, I'm like, Man City are one of the best defences in the world. They've got 3 home fixtures coming up. They play in blank game week 26. Just get a City defender. And if they miss the odd game, they miss the odd game. But then when I start talking about it out loud in videos, I'm like, I don't know who's going to start. They've not been actually keeping clean sheets because, in my opinion, Ederson is not a good goalkeeper. Their actual points per game is pretty shocking. 3.2 being the best really isn't very good. They don't carry that much attacking threat maybe outside of Ake. And also they're not that good for bonus points. So I'm like, why am I even considering them? Why have I spent the last 10 minutes talking about Man City defenders? If I were to select one at the moment, it would still be Kyle Walker. I still feel like he's the most nailed on at the moment based on everything that we've seen. But I think there is definitely something to be said for Ake and Gvardiol if they do continue to get good minutes. And Ake in particular, I think, is the more likely of the two to get those good minutes. The data is also very strong as well. I would love to know down below, are you considering any Man City defenders? And if so, who are you most likely to buy? So moving on to the Manchester City attackers, definitely more interesting for us from an FPL perspective, I would say, than the defenders. And a lot of us probably, I would say almost everyone will own at least one Man City attacker already. And the first thing I would start by saying is if you obviously own Haaland, De Bruyne, Foden, or Alvarez, and you may not agree with me on this one, I wouldn't be selling any of those four. So if your questions revolve around, should you sell Alvarez to allow you to bring X in? I don't think, based on everything that we've seen thus far, that you should sell any of those four assets. And I know Alvarez will be a controversial one because people will think maybe his minutes will be reduced. Maybe I should move to the likes of Darwin or Tony. But the only game that we've had where everyone has been fully fit was obviously the game just now against Brentford. And I know Brentford are a different opposition for City because they struggle massively and Pep probably really wanted to win that game. They lost both games last season in the Premier League. I think Pep put out basically every strong player that he had in the attack and just hoped that he could overwhelm Brentford. And he did manage that. But we saw that there is a world in which all of the key attackers start. And if you didn't see the game, what we essentially saw was Haaland through the middle, Foden on the left, Bernardo Silva on the right, and it was Rodri, Alvarez, and KDB through the middle. Of course, Alvarez and KDB being slightly further forward than Rodri. What was most interesting about that is I thought for large parts of that game, De Bruyne was actually further forward than Alvarez, and it was actually Alvarez who was bridging the gap a little bit more between Rodri and Kevin De Bruyne. But I guess the important thing to say is this now, KDB and Haaland being back, we said we think Foden's minutes might be reduced. We think Alvarez's minutes might be reduced. And to some extent, I would still say that I would be surprised if Foden and Alvarez's minutes don't drop slightly based on KDB and Haaland being back. But we could see them all start. Most games. Not every game, but most games, we could see them start. I think the only thing that was slightly confusing about this is he's got Grealish and Doku available, and both of them are absolutely exceptional footballers, and they fit into the City system very well. I don't think that we'll see on a consistent basis Foden starting on the left when it means that he has to bench both Doku and Grealish on a consistent basis. I think he'll want to see Foden in a more central role, or he'll want to push Foden onto the right, which brings Bernardo Silva into a more central role. So I still think whilst there is a world in which all of those five key attackers start alongside Rodri, I don't think that that will happen on a consistent basis. And I think it will be one of them will come out more often than not. So it may be that in one game, Foden sits on the bench and we have Doku, Bernardo Silva on the wings and Haaland through the middle. It may be that Alvarez sits out and we actually see Foden and KDB in central roles. And of course, Kevin De Bruyne is not going to be able to play every game either. But I just wanted to say that I don't think that now that everyone's back, we've seen that Pep is going to be happy enough in some games to play all of those key attackers. And I think they're all going to get some minutes. The other thing to note, which I thought was interesting, is De Bruyne played the full game and he looked pretty fit right until the end. So that is very interesting that we now know that De Bruyne is fit enough to not only start consecutive games, but also get 90 minutes, which is very, very big news. And also, Haaland pretty much played the full game. I think he got about 85 minutes. So Haaland and De Bruyne are now fit enough to play 90. Pulls into question, of course, captaincy for 25, probably on one of them, but also triple captaincy as well. So I think triple captaincy in 25, unless we see something against Everton which really puts us off, I think it is quite likely for me. I just don't think the bench boost suits my team. So triple captain in 25 on Haaland probably looks fairly likely. But it also makes De Bruyne a much better option because I've never sat here in a video and said I don't like De Bruyne. I've always just said that my issue with De Bruyne is I don't know how good his minutes will be coming back from injury and I don't think he'll be rushed back. And he certainly hasn't been rushed back. But now that he started consecutive games and played 90 minutes in that game as well, it's making me start to think De Bruyne could still be worth the 10.8 or even if he's 11 million by that point for double game week 25, especially given that he also plays in blank game week 26. So there's some more sort of macro thoughts around the players. When we're looking at the data, De Bruyne has not really played any minutes, but his data has been good that he's played. And of course, we have data historically from previous seasons. De Bruyne will be a fantastic FPL asset when he plays. and if he gets the minutes. My only caveat around De Bruyne's data, if you look at it, it looks fantastic, right? 0.65 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. 0.5 of that is his assist threat. 0.5 is expected assist. He's actually only got 0.15 non-penalty expected goals. And that is consistent with what we've seen in previous seasons. So my only issue with De Bruyne as an asset is he's £11 million for lots of assists. And that isn't necessarily an issue. We've seen both De Bruyne and Fernandes in the past can pick up a lot of bonus points just through the amount of chances they create. But for those mega hauls, you need the goals as well. And I know he will score the odd long shot because his finishing is excellent. But I kind of want to see a little bit more goal threat from De Bruyne. So that would be my only concern, is that for the most part, we're seeing a lot of creativity, but less goal threat from him. The only player that stands out on this list for data-wise is Haaland. If you don't own Haaland, I'm not going to discuss him here. It's worth buying him. It's worth captaining him. I know he hasn't looked quite at it in his 2 appearances thus far. But if he tucks away that one-on-one, and I know you'll say, well, he didn't tuck away that one-on-one, and that is fair enough. But if he does, we're not even having a conversation. It's just Haaland in, Haaland captain. So I still think Haaland is an absolute must. But I think De Bruyne is certainly a better asset than I thought he was 3 or 4 weeks ago. So I will hold my hands up and say that I maybe misjudged how many minutes he would get so soon into his return to the team. So De Bruyne and Haaland, obviously great. Foden and Alvarez, I'll discuss the two next with respect to data. Foden's data this season is pretty poor for me, for a Phil Foden, right? 0.48 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 is less than Grealish and only slightly better than Doku, Bernardo Silva and Rodri. It's not that brilliant. The good thing that I like about him is he's got goal threat and he's got assist threat, but he's nowhere near the goal threat of Alvarez, for example. You can see here, Alvarez has 0.61 non-penalty expected goal involvement, and a lot of that is made up through goal threat. So if you were to say objectively, who is the better asset if they're getting similar minutes? For me, it is hands down Alvarez. Because Alvarez is also still taking some set pieces when KDB's on the pitch. He won't be on penalties now, of course, but his goal threat is just so good. And it's not just his goal threat when Haaland wasn't in the team. His goal threat's always been pretty decent as well when he's playing in a midfield role. So I just think that Alvarez is a better asset than Foden, assuming that they play a similar amount of minutes. Of course, the concern that we have is that they probably won't play a similar amount of minutes. You would have to predict that if one was going to get more minutes, it is Foden, simply because Foden can play left, right, and central, whereas Alvarez, assuming Haaland plays every game, can only play through the middle. So whilst I don't think Alvarez is just going to drop out of the team, and like I said, if I still owned Alvarez, I now wouldn't be selling him based on what we saw against Brentford, but I still think Foden's going to get slightly more minutes. And therefore, whilst Alvarez's data is better than Foden's, I would still just about edge towards saying that I think Foden is a slightly better asset than Alvarez. On Grealish and Doku, the data's not great. You can see by their minutes per game, Grealish is at 53, Doku at 63. They're just not getting enough minutes this season. And now that we've seen that Foden can play on the left if he wants to play all of his other attackers, not only are Grealish and Doku battling out for a starting position between themselves, you've then got Foden chucked into the equation. And if he is going to prefer Foden on the left, Foden will start more games than not. So I just don't think at this stage you can go for Grealish or Doku. If you own one of them, I don't think they're an immediate sell. Maybe assess what we see this week and maybe look at the press conference from Pep. Maybe he says something along the lines of that was just a one-off with Foden playing on the left. I think Doku is a slightly better option than Grealish, despite the data not suggesting that, simply because I think Doku will just get more minutes than Grealish. I think he is just about ahead in the pecking order. Bernardo Silva is an interesting one because his data isn't fantastic, right? Because he's 0.4, but it's not far off Foden's. And so I don't think I can sit here and say Foden's a great asset and Bernardo Silva's not, because they probably will get a similar amount of minutes. And therefore I have to say that Bernardo Silva, for 1.4 million less than Foden, is a pretty good option. So I'm not really going to say anything bad about Bernardo Silva. I just think that he'll tick along with the odd assist, the odd goal. But if you're looking for that player that is going to get you a monster score, Bernardo Silva's data and performances in general doesn't seem to suggest he's that player. So I think he's very safe. He's very cheap as well. But Foden, as we saw by that 20-pointer, definitely has the upside, as does Alvarez, De Bruyne, and Haaland as well. So I don't mind Bernardo. I think his minutes will be okay, but he's not my sort of FPL player. Another player that's not my sort of FPL player is actually Rodri. And in the past, I've really criticised managers that have bought him. But I have to say, for the upcoming period, I don't hate this. If you are really in a position where you just can't stretch to the likes of Foden, De Bruyne, Haaland, Alvarez, and maybe you just don't fancy Bernardo Silva, but you still want a second or third City asset, Rodri's data is actually okay. He is by far and away the most nailed out of all of these City players. You can see his points per game has actually been better than Grealish, Doku. It's not far off Bernardo Silva and Foden. And his non-penalty expected goal involvement is actually up at 0.35 per 90. So I can't sit here and say Rodri's a really bad pick. Again, is he my sort of FPL pick? Would I ever buy Rodri? No. But can I sit here and say don't do it yourself? No, not at all, because he's putting up data similar to some of the forwards that we've been looking at. He's not really far off Doku and Bernardo Silva as well, and he's so nailed. And I think in these games where teams play a very, very low block, which we might see against Brentford once again, Rodri is the kind of player that can pop up on the edge of the box with a goal. And he's also very good in the air as well. So I like Rodri as an option. Again, not my sort of FPL pick, and I want to make it clear that I wouldn't buy him. But if you are really short for cash and you still want a City asset, you know for a fact that he'll play pretty much every game available for Man City, and he will pop up with the odd return as well. So that is the City assets discussed. If I were on a wild card this week, without a shadow of a doubt, my three would be Haaland, De Bruyne, Foden. I would skip the City defence and I would skip any of the other City assets. But like I said, if you own Alvarez, I would be tempted to keep him. And if you can't stretch to have Haaland, De Bruyne, Foden, and you still want a third City asset, I think you can do worse than the likes of Bernardo Silva and Rodri. And in the worst position, if you've just got a free defender spot and you want to back the City defence to improve, I think any of the aforementioned City players could do really, really well for the defence. So, of course, there are other Liverpool assets that could be very good for the double game week. And I want to quickly do this now, but I will also discuss this in more detail in my team selection video because I'm considering them, and also probably in the deadline decisions video. But both Van Dijk and Alisson, I think, could be very shrewd pickups ahead of Game Week 24 against Burnley and then the double game week as well. Because I think Liverpool will keep clean sheets across those three games. I would predict a minimum of one, potentially even two. Burnley at home and Luton at home feel like good fixtures. I know Luton have been attacking very well, but I still think at Anfield they will dominate that game and they'll give Luton very few chances. So I actually feel that Alisson and Van Dijk could be really nice pickups. Alisson in particular, because he not only allows you to get an extra Liverpool player, but he doesn't create an issue for you in blank game week 26, assuming you've got someone like an Areola or a Dubravka that you can play instead. So I really like Alisson for that reason. And Van Dijk is just so nailed. Really decent goal threat when he plays. And he's also good for bonus points often as well. So I like Van Dijk and Alisson. And obviously, if Salah is available, which we'll discuss later in the week, if it looks like he could be, Salah is always a really, really good option as well. And you could go for someone like a Diaz or a Gakpo or a McAllister if you think they'll get significant minutes and you want to go there. But really, I think, and obviously Trent is the final one to discuss, but I think Trent's kind of a don't buy, don't sell at the moment because we don't really know what's going on with these minutes and how fit he's going to be. And once Bradley comes in, what's going to happen with his position. So I really think it probably does come down to Darwin and Jota. And for many of you, you may be in a position where you can get both. And I really don't mind that because yes, they blank in 26. But getting Darwin and Jota, we're predicting probably 3 starts for each, probably. It will depend on Salah's fitness, of course, and how well they play in the first 1 or 2. And of course, they do have the cup final to prepare for as well. So maybe they don't get 3. But let's say now we're predicting probably 3 starts, definitely 2. There's just such high upside there. And even if you can carry them through 26, one of them, they've then got Forest away in 27. So I do think it is worth bringing them in, but it is, again, worth really drawing your attention to this blank game week in 26 because Chelsea, Spurs, Luton and Liverpool will all blank in 26. And therefore, if you're sat there with Richarlison, Palmer, Porro and Kunku, something like that, you've also got Trent, you've also got Alisson. Like, you may be in a position where you're like, hang on a second, I've got a lot of players that are blanking here. So fixtures-wise, we know now it's probably worth attacking the next 3, but just bear in mind, obviously, game week 26. I really was hesitant to do... I knew I needed to do this section, right? It's such an important thing to discuss this week, but I was hesitant to do it because I just don't know who I prefer out of the 2. Like, if you're sat there in your team and you've got an easy-ish route to Darwin and an easiest route to Jota, but you only want to select one, I really, really don't know. It's very, very difficult to separate them because... as you can imagine, Darwin's data is just better because he's got better data than pretty much everyone in the league. So let's go through it here. Minutes per game, Darwin has been slightly more nailed this year, but Jota's been suffering with injuries and stuff. So let's just say that I think they are, at the moment, about as nailed as each other. I think both of them can play through the centre or off the left. He seems to be preferring Darwin off the left and Jota through the middle. I don't think that massively aids or hurts either of them. I think they are both good in either position. And I think they're relatively nailed in the fact that I think even once Salah's back, I think Liverpool's ideal front 3 is Darwin, Jota and Salah. So for the time being, I don't think minutes will be a massive issue for either of them. When we look at actual performance and output, Jota is coming out on top. You can see here, he's got 8.42 FPL points per 90 this season versus Darwin's 6.09. So regarding actual output, Jota is coming out on top, but that is the only thing that he actually comes out on top in. And this will be a big swinging factor for a lot of people. They will just say Jota is just a better finisher. He's a better player, and you would therefore expect him to finish more of the chances he gets. And I'm not really going to complain with that narrative, right? I do think Jota is a slightly better finisher. I do think he is more clinical, and I think if you give them an equal number of one-on-ones or big chances, Jota will finish more than Darwin. But I don't think it's that significant. And I actually looked at the data over at FBref, which gives you a bit of an idea about XGI delta. So whether someone overperforms or underperforms their data. Jota does traditionally slightly overperform his data, especially since being at Liverpool. But he's not a massive overperformer of data. We see the likes of Haaland, like Son, Messi. These are players that are clinical elite finishers that will really consistently overperform their expected data. Jota's not one of those players. It is marginal at best, and there have been seasons when he hasn't overperformed. He's actually quite underperformed, especially, I think, in his final season at Wolves, we saw that quite a bit. So I wouldn't go out there and just say that Jota is that much better of a finisher than Darwin. And Darwin's performances at points, like, it really depends on the day for him. At points this season, he's actually massively overperformed his expected data. I can't remember, it was about game week 8 or 9. I remember looking at the data and actually saying, to this point, Darwin's actually overperforming his expected data. And yes, he's chaotic, and we've seen he hit the woodwork 4 times recently. He missed a penalty. He will create chaos, but I think the narratives are getting pushed too far in either direction. I think the narrative is getting pushed that Jota is like Messi and Son, and he's going to overperform at 15%, which he will not on a consistent basis. And I feel like the other direction is going too far with Darwin, where he's just going to never finish anything. I think the truth is that Jota is slightly better in that sense, but not massively better. But when we look at the underlying data, you can see 6.35 expected FPL points for Darwin, 5.75 for Diogo Jota. So actually, Darwin is marginally underperforming his actual expected FPL points, and then Jota is massively overperforming his expected FPL points. Will that continue? I don't think so, not at that rate, in my personal opinion. And then when we get into the actual data, it gets kind of massive. So Darwin's non-penalty expected goals is 0.69 per 90. Right? Let's round that up to 0.7. Jota's is 0.35. So Darwin's is just under double the goal threat of Jota. That is a significant difference. That is enough of a difference where I would say I would rather take the person that finishes less of their chances but is getting double the amount of chances, or at least double the amount of goal threat that the other player is. Darwin just gets a monster number of chances. And I think for that reason, even though his finishing isn't as good, I probably would slightly prefer him, right? Because he's just going to get so many more chances to score goals. I was actually quite surprised because Jota does strike me as the kind of player that is very creative, at least for a forward. Darwin's actually got better expected assist as well. So 0.2 expected assist to Jota's 0.16. The thing that really struck me is the big chance involvement. I know Darwin's had 1 penalty, which obviously slightly skews the number, but not massively. Darwin has got 2.3 big chance involvement per 90, and that's a combination of big chances created and big chances himself, and Jota has 0.69. So Jota is not getting involved in 1 big chance per 90, whereas Darwin has an involvement in over 2 of them, usually getting the big chances himself. If you are wondering what's their data like more recently, since Salah's not been there, it's even better for Darwin and slightly better. So it's quite a bit better for Darwin. He's sitting at about a 1.2 XGI per 90. And then Jota's has just lifted up slightly. So he's sitting at about 0.6, 0.7. So both of them have been brilliant recently, right? This data for Jota at 0.51 non-penalty expected goal per 90 is better than the likes of Foden. It's comparable to the likes of Grealish. It's better than Doku, but it's not great. And I would suggest that what we've seen from Jota recently is quite a bit of overperformance. And unless he starts to get a lot more clear-cut chances, or he continues to finish at a level that we've not yet seen in his career, I don't think he'll continue to perform at quite the rate that he was. Now, I'm a massive Darwin fanboy. If you've watched my channel for a while, you know I love him. But I am presenting objective numbers here. I'm framing it a certain way, but you can see the numbers. It comes down to, for me, when you're making this decision, 2 things. How do you see the minutes going, especially if Salah is back soon? Do you see one of these 2 getting slightly better minutes? Because if you see one of them starting 3 and the other one starting 2, just pick the one that starts 3. If you think Jota starts 3 and Darwin only gets 2 starts, Jota is a much better option because the minutes will be important there. So that's the first thing. How do you see the minutes going? And then the second thing is, how much do you buy into this finishing and being clinical impacting FPL, right? Because If you think that Jota is a much, much better finisher and will finish a significantly higher quantity of chances, then you might just look at this data and say, I don't care that Darwin has double the goal threat of Jota because Jota will finish double the chances that Darwin will. I don't think that will be the case. So therefore, my conclusion is that Darwin is a marginally better option than Jota, but there is not a lot in this. I am not going to sit here and say, definitely Darwin, break your team to get him in, because Jota is a brilliant option himself. I am strongly considering Jota for my own team, and I think he's one of the better midfielders to own at the moment. The only final thing when you're trying to make this decision to think about is also who's going in the other direction. Because sometimes we get these blinkers on where we just like, I want Darwin, I want Jota. If you're having to sell Watkins or Solanke to bring Darwin in, but you've got, I don't know, like an Eze sat there ready to go to Jota, that's not really a difficult decision for me, because I think Darwin is a marginally better option than Jota, but I don't think that Solanke and Watkins are marginally better options than Eze, especially given the injury doubts. I think they are significantly better. So it not only matters who you're bringing in, it also matters who you're selling. And this is kind of a bit of advice in general. I think we can often be focused on shiny new toys and not consider the impact of selling certain players on our team. If you're selling Watkins, there's a good chance you want him back in. If you're selling Solanke, you are definitely going to want him back in for a probable upcoming double, maybe even as early as Game Week 27 or Game Week 28. So I feel like you also need to consider, like I said, who is going the other direction just as much as whether you prefer Darwin or Jota. That was, again, a very long section on only 2 players, but I know this is a massive, difficult decision for a lot of people. I will just end on saying, if it's a -4 to bring in both and you're happy to sell the players you have to sell, I don't mind the idea of bringing both in. And again, I already own Darwin. I already own Trent. I am certainly considering the idea of bringing in Jota for a triple up, but I am just bearing in mind also that it is going to make my team very, very weak for blank Game Week 26. So a lot of the focus from us content creators this week, as you can probably imagine, and also probably going into next week, will be around Manchester City and Liverpool, given that they both double again, but also that they have so many good assets to choose from. But there are also other players that could do really well in the upcoming period. And I'm thinking about players that do double, maybe from Brentford and Luton in 25, but also players that don't double, because there are a few things to note here, right? First being, are you sure that the player that you're bringing in is even going to start both in the double? And for all of the players that we've discussed today, I actually think literally everyone, apart from maybe Van Dijk, Alisson and Rodri, there is a chance that they don't start both in the double. So immediately in that situation, you are looking at a player that is basically as good as someone like a Højlund, given that they're not going to have any extra fixtures. When you then consider that Liverpool also blank in 26 and you might have to take them out, you may actually be in a position where you're getting less fixtures from a player that you're bringing in for a double game week. So I certainly wouldn't disregard single game week players. And if you were to tell me that you're going to make a single game week transfer this week, i.e. a player that is not doubling anytime soon, I don't mind that at all. I don't think that you should just completely disregard these options. And like I said, there are also players from the likes of Luton and Brentford. All of us will be focusing our attention on Manchester City and Liverpool, but they could do equally well. So I've just got a few players here that were mentioned over on Twitter and have been transferred in by some people that I know you might want me to discuss. If there are any players that I've missed in this video and aren't included here, please let me know down below in the comments and I'll try and cover them in the deadline decisions video on Friday. So I've actually got 2 Manchester United players here at the top and bottom of the table, which is Højlund and Garnacho. I'm struggling not to get carried away as a Manchester United fan because the performances recently have been much better. And I think the main reason for that is we've got most of our starting 11 back. Obviously, Lisandro Martinez being back was massive. Him being out is a big loss. But in general, the team just looks a little bit stronger having all of the options back. And with Højlund, if you watch Man United on a consistent basis, it always felt like he was very close. He hasn't put in my opinion, a bad performance since being in a Manchester United shirt. He's always running. He's always running the channels. He's always pressing more than anyone else. And he always has a good striking action. He always looks like he can score goals. He's good in the air. He's got good hold-up play. I've been very impressed, but he was just lacking that first goal or those first couple of goals to get the momentum. And he's got those now. And he is returning on a consistent basis. And he is certainly a player that I would consider if you're looking outside of the obvious double game week options. My issue with Højlund is there are so many good forwards to choose from at the moment. Not only the double game week options like Tony and Darwin and Haaland and Alvarez, but also the likes of Cunha, who we'll discuss in a second. João Pedro, when he's fit and available, is absolutely brilliant. Watkins, Solanke, right? There are just so many forwards. But also his data isn't very good. And whilst from an eye test perspective, I like what I see from Højlund, his data is 0.31 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. So for me, Højlund is great. If you wanted him, go for it. But I don't think I can sit here and suggest with any confidence that he's a good pick at the moment. Garnacho is kind of similar in that he looks great, but his data really isn't. We're sitting at a 0.38 non-penalty expected goal involvement, which is only marginally better than Rodri. Just to put that into perspective for you. Worse than Bernardo Silva. I like him. He's nailed. Passing the eye test. He'll continue to get returns because he's confident. And I also think Garnacho is a really good finisher of the ball as well. I would say for me, the only time that I would consider Garnacho at the moment is if it allows you to get to KDB and Haaland, or if Salah comes back into the fold, and the only way to get Salah is to get someone like a Garnacho in. You can certainly do worse. And I would say that under 5 million, whilst I'll discuss Barkley in a second, Garnacho is probably my favourite option. So I don't mind him if he enables something else, but I wouldn't go for him unless you really need him. I've then got 2 Wolves players on here. I've got Cunha and Hwang. I would also just chuck Neto in there as well because I really do like Neto. But I just think Cunha and Hwang carry more goal threat. Neto is great because he's very, very creative and he will score goals as well. But Cunha and Hwang have that goal, that desire to score goals that I just don't think Neto quite has. I also think that one of Cunha and Hwang will be on penalties. Who that is, I've got absolutely no idea. I think probably Cunha based on what we've seen recently, but we think Hwang was probably on penalties before he went away, and therefore he might take them back. By the way, if you haven't yet seen, South Korea were knocked out of the Asian Cup, and therefore there's a good chance that Hwang's back for 24. If not 24, maybe 25. But by all accounts, I think there's a good chance he's back for 24. You can see that their data is almost identical. The thing that I like about Cunha is he seems slightly more nailed than Hwang, as you can see by the minutes per game. And the other thing I like about Cunha is that I do think he is on a hot streak at the moment, and that doesn't really look like it's ending anytime soon. And whilst the data won't pick this up, getting on a player that is on a hot streak, and Garnacho and Haaland are examples of that, it can be very fruitful. We've seen that in the past with Almiron last season. 2 or 3 seasons ago, I think it was 3 seasons ago now, we saw that with Jesse Lingard. There are players that just go on these runs, and Cunha seems to be on a run like that at the moment. So I think they're both good options, but maybe I would just about favour Cunha. But again, Hwang's in the midfield spot where I think midfield spots are a little bit more vacant at the moment than those forward spots. I've got Bailey on here because, it's just such a frustration. If Bailey's minutes were more secure, he would be in everyone's teams. I can almost promise you of that because his returns are outrageously good. He's getting a return at roughly the same rate as Ollie Watkins. And obviously he doesn't have the same number of returns because he hasn't played the same number of minutes. But if he were to play the same number of minutes as Watkins, the return suggests that he would return a similar amount. And you can see his data actually is comfortably the best on this list. It's actually much better than pretty much every player we've looked at today. Better than Jota, better than Foden, better than Doku, Grealish, Bernardo Silva, better than, or similar to KDB. He's just brilliant. And I just can't wrap my head around him not starting and getting good minutes in every game. Emery is kind of, he's basically, I don't know, experimented with dropping Diaby at points and then playing only Bailey. He's experimented with dropping Bailey and playing Diaby. He then had an experiment recently where he tried to squeeze both Bailey and Diaby into the same team. It just didn't work. It doesn't work. You need to start one of them, and Bailey is, at the moment, a much better player for Aston Villa than Diaby. So I think Emery has now seen that. And I would expect Bailey to start pretty much every game. And even if he does get the odd early sub, or even an early sub every game, with the rate that he returns, I still think he's a great option at 5.6. So I definitely wouldn't disregard, especially with the fixture that they've got coming up, Bailey. I think he's great. Whether he can stay fit and stay in the team is obviously a slightly different question. I've then got 3 very cheap Luton assets on here. Now, Luton are a very interesting team because they have Sheffield United at home in 24, which is obviously brilliant. We've spoken so much about 25 this week, we almost forget that that's next week, right? This is game week 24. They've got the best fixture of the bunch against the worst team in the league. They are scoring goals for fun as well. They double in game week 25, and albeit a very difficult double, they still double. Unfortunately, they do blank in 26, but it goes beyond that, why I think they are great options. There is a rumour going around at the moment that the Bournemouth versus Luton game will be rescheduled into game week 28, which would be brilliant for Luton. It would give them a very, very strong double game week, so they'd be really nice for that. And also, they are more likely than not to have a game in game week 29 against Nottingham Forest. If all of those things do happen, what you're looking at with Luton is a brilliant fixture this week, a double in 25, yes, a blank in 26, but then another double in 28 and a fixture in blank game week 29. Luton could offer brilliant value if all of that stuff happens, but there are a lot of ifs and buts. And whilst Luton have been scoring goals recently and their form has definitely improved, I don't think we want to get carried away and think that they are like a top half of the table side because they're not. They are still a side that more often than not will lose and will still struggle against many bigger teams. Putting 4 goals past Newcastle, I'm not discrediting Luton at all, but that probably says more about Newcastle than Luton at the moment. I think Newcastle are a team that are really struggling defensively. And I know Luton scored, they scored 3 against Arsenal, so they can score goals against big teams, but I don't want to get carried away with how good the Luton assets are. When we look at who is the best Luton asset, I think there is one massive standout for me. I'll just make a note on Carlton Morris. Carlton Morris is actually playing a new role at the moment. He was playing obviously as the out-and-out number 9 earlier in the season. He then dropped out the team. He's back in the team for the last couple, and he's actually playing a little bit deeper, almost like a support striker. He's still getting returns though, and he's on penalties too. So if he continues to start in that role, but that is a big if because I don't yet know if that's going to be the case, Morris could still be really good value at 5, but I don't know if that'll be the case. So for now, I can't really suggest him. We've got Barkley on here. There seemed to be a lot of hype around Barkley. Brilliant this season. He really has been very good for Luton. We've not discussed him here on this channel because being brilliant for Luton is very different to being a good FPL asset. And he has the worst data out of all of the attackers we've looked at today. 0.28 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. It's really bad. And I think that is indicative of the role that he's playing. He's playing more of a deep role than an attacking role, almost box to box at points, but he's just not getting the number of chances, not creating the number of chances that you would need for me to suggest him to you. If you don't go off data and you go off eye test, you may have seen something that I've not, but I'm going off the numbers here and they're really not good enough to look at him. So I'm not disregarding him as such, but I can't consider bringing in a player that the data says will get you a return every 4 games. It's just not quite good enough for me. I'd much rather a Garnacho who's got slightly better data, or I'd much rather try and find the money for, I don't know, someone like a Neto or a Hwang, for me at least. The one player that does interest me is Adebayo. Better data. We're seeing a similar kind of data to Cunha and Hwang. Minutes have been good recently, although across the season, obviously, a little bit more sporadic, but recently he seems to be relatively nailed. And there's also been an upturn in his data in recent games too. And in a similar way to what I said with Cunha, he just seems to be in a bit of form at the moment. And if you can catch players at the right point when they are on those runs, it can be very fruitful for you. So I think if I were to choose a Luton asset at the moment, maybe outside of Doughty, who's great, but we're not really looking at defenders here, Adebayo would probably be the one. But again, how are you getting Adebayo into your team? There are so many forwards to choose from. The only world in which I can see that you're looking at an Adebayo right now is, again, if it allows you to get a Haaland, KDB, Salah into your team that you don't already have. And maybe, like for me, one way that I can get KDB is doing Watkins to Adebayo and then doing Gordon to KDB. In that position, yes, Adebayo could be good. But again, in a similar way to Garnacho, the only way that then I would suggest probably looking at Adebayo is if you need the money, because I still think most of the forwards at a more expensive price are probably worth the money. So there are some other players that maybe other people haven't been discussing as much because the focus is on Liverpool and City. If there are any players that I've missed discussing today, let me know down below, as I said, and I'll cover that on Friday. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 24 preview. Another long video, but there was a lot I wanted to say around the City players. Darwin and Jota feels like a very important decision this week. And I also didn't want to stop there. I also wanted to discuss some other players. So it ended up being a long video, but I kind of like these Game Week preview videos being longer because this is the in-depth video midweek where I look at the data. Maybe the team selection one I can speed up a bit, but this one I like it being long because that's the way it should be in my opinion. And if you did get any value out of today's video and you enjoyed it at all, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. When I don't ask you to subscribe, no one subscribes, so I'm asking you now, please consider subscribing. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.